My name is Katie Miller. I am the technical support manager at Kavira Coalition, and I am housed under the education and outreach team. I also have June Curtis here with me, and she is an intern with us at Kavira. And this webinar it was basically created between the two of us with the assumption that the audience has a general understanding of ranching terms, grazing terminology. But if you don't, that's completely fine. Feel free again to ask questions, drop them in the chat. We won't be offended at all. Um, if you just came on late, we're asking people to put in the chat where you're joining us from. And if you feel like it, if you have a St. Patrick's Day tradition, since it's St. Patrick's Day today, feel free to drop that in there. In case you missed it, tonight's webinar is about using technology in grazing management. Again, presented by myself and intern June Curtis. So little introductions about me and June. I'll start first. Um, I am a rancher east of Colorado Springs. I'm a first generation rancher. And today in this webinar, we're going to be utilizing my own operation and my ranch that you see here in this picture as kind of the example to understand the website and the technology that we'll be leading you through and doing a demonstration about. I my background is I'm a holistic management educator through HMI and also Savory Institute. Again, yeah, first generation rancher. I currently raise pride, prime, predominantly grass-fed beef, Texas Longhorns, and direct market it to customers locally. I also have raised sheep, goats, have horses. I've done aquaponic tilapia. I have all kinds of poultry. So kind of a modern day Old MacDonald farm. And so I know a little bit about everything, but I'm not claiming to be an expert in anything. I also do lease irrigated hay fields and put up our own hay as well. And so tonight I'm just going to be telling you and informing you about how I discovered this website and how I have come to find it really useful as far as helping me figure out different kinds of management decisions and plans for my grazing and my operation. And I'll let June go ahead and introduce herself.
Hi guys, thanks so much for being here. My name is June Curtis. I'm a research intern at Kivira, and I do a lot of work with data analysis and soil science stuff related to our experimental trials of compost and biochar on working ranches. And I've also spent 6 summers working on ranches myself.
Thank you, June. So what we're going to cover tonight is um, basically an overview of a website called the Rangeland Analysis Platform or rangeland.app. And we're going to be discussing why technology matters for grazing management, introducing you to this website that sometimes is abbreviated to RAP, understanding how to understand forage production data that you can find on this website, determining stocking rates and carrying capacity. And then I'll be giving a live walkthrough of the actual website using my ranch as an example. And then June will be talking about some additional tools that you can utilize to support grazing decisions. So why technology matters in grazing? Basically, technology plus observation equals better management. Utilizing technology can help us understand long-term trends in vegetation. It can help us track forage production over time. It can help us respond to drought or variable precipitation given the knowledge and past trends that we can see in historical data. It can also help us improve our stocking decisions and our carrying capacity. And that can guide us to manage our land more sustainably and more regeneratively. So ultimately, technology is a tool, but it doesn't replace the on-ground knowledge. So when we dive into this website, rangelands.app, we're encouraging you to use this alongside your own observations and with your own local knowledge of the land, and also with site-specific data.
Okay, I'm just going to give you guys a quick intro to the platform. We're going to jump right in. So the image that you see on this slide is a direct screenshot from the Rangeland Analysis Platform, or RAP, as I'll mostly be calling it, because it's a less of a mouthful. And it's a free online tool. It's available to everyone. And I want to talk a little bit about where the data that RAP gets is from, because I think that's really cool. So it mostly focuses on vegetation cover data across the United States. And this data is derived from a combination of sources. It comes from like satellite imagery from above, and this is combined with like on the ground monitoring data that land management agencies like the Forest Service, the BLM collect in their routine monitoring. And RAP kind of integrates that with satellite imagery to make these computer models that can then provide this vegetation cover data. So this is another screenshot from the RAP website, what it looks like. And there's a lot of different things you can analyze with RAP. You can, for ranchers specifically, that's what we're going to focus on in this webinar, because I know that's what perspective a lot of you guys are coming from. It can help you determine your long-term forage production. It can help you think about the composition of the vegetation on your land, think about changes in bare ground, year-to-year forage variability, and even precipitation trends. So RAP does have a precipitation component that you can integrate to kind of see how vegetation and precipitation are influencing each other. So yeah, this can help you evaluate lots of different things. It can help you see how changes in your management are changing vegetation cover. It can help you see what impacts droughts and things like that are having, and just help you evaluate your overall ecosystem health. And so, yeah, below this is just a picture from the wrap, and Katie's gonna, when she gets into the tutorial later, she's gonna tell you more about what all of these things mean.
All right, so now we're going to talk about the key vegetation indicators and why they matter. So, RAP tracks a lot of important vegetation characteristics, including annual and perennial grasses and forbs, shrub cover, tree cover, bare ground, litter cover, and annual precipitation. And these indicators help identify ecosystem changes over time, or they can also help to educate you and guide you in how a property, say, if you were starting a new lease or purchasing a property, they can help you kind of understand how um, some of the trends have incurred over the land over a period of time.
So, just as an intro, I'm going to take you guys through three of RAP's main features. And the first one is vegetation cover. So, this is the primary thing that RAP is used for, and it's what you see when you like launch the map and go onto the website. This right here, the image on the left, is a screenshot directly from RAP showing the cover of perennial forbs and grasses over the US. So the darker zones are areas with a higher density of perennial forbs and grasses, and then the lighter green zones are where the vegetation is less dense. Maybe there's more bare ground cover. And so when it comes to vegetation cover, RAP has like two types of data. It has what it calls 10-meter cover and it has 30-meter cover. And so that just like is talking about the size of the pixels when it comes to the resolution of the data. So the 10-meter cover that you can look at is going to be a higher resolution of data because each data pixel is like 10 meters wide. So this is like a really zoomed in data set that you can start to look at. That data, it's a more feature they rolled out more recently. So that goes back to about 2016. But if you're wanting to look at more historical data, you can look at the 30-meter cover, which goes back to 1986, if I'm correct. Another really cool thing about RAP is that it's able to use the satellite data and use imagery to separate plants by functional group. So it actually allows you to differentiate between tree cover, shrub cover, and grass cover. And then even within grass cover, you're able to look at perennial forbs and grasses versus annual forbs and grasses separately. So this is really cool if you're like in areas, for example, that have a big annual invasive grass problem. You can kind of see what's going on with that. with RAP. And then for ranchers, it's really useful for visualizing the plant composition on your ranch, changes in bare ground over time, and how shrub encroachment might be playing a role on your land. Yeah, it's just really cool. It's a really like localized data. So it means you can look at it like really zoomed out like we are right now on the map, or you can look at one state at a time. You can even zoom into your individual property level to see what's going on there. So I just think that's really cool. All right, the next feature I want to talk about is annual biomass production. So biomass just kind of refers to any kind of plant material, refers to the above ground components like woody material, tree trunks, stems, leaves, grasses, and then the below ground material, like the plant roots. That's what biomass kind of refers to in general. When RAP is talking about biomass, it's mostly going to focus on the above ground component because it is using that satellite data. And so that's kind of what it's going to tell you about how much pounds of plant material is your land producing. And it's great that it just tells you the above ground component because cows aren't eating the roots of plants anyway. So yeah, you can use the biomass feature it can tell you how many pounds of forage are being produced per acre on your land and how forage production is changing from year to year. Just to slide over to the right side of this slide, this is a screenshot from RAP from Katie's ranch. So her property is outlined with the black line there. And you can see the color bar kind of shows the amount of biomass production. It's kind of like a scale. And so the darker green areas show where her land is more productive, and then the lighter yellow areas might show where there's more bare ground or the grass is less dense. You can also see biomass production over time with the graph on the right. This is something that RAP just creates when you ask it to analyze a property. And so you can see how productivity, how biomass production has changed on Katie's land over time. Okay, and then we have 16-day biomass production. So RAP updates itself all the time, which is another really cool thing about it. And so it's actually able to compare like a satellite image of your ranch today from one 16 days ago and kind of calculate and extrapolate the difference in plant biomass between these two images to see, okay, like how much grass has grown on my property in the past 16 days. So this is really useful for making your seasonal management decisions, like when should I start putting cows in this pasture this year? What time of year is my peak forage production? And what should my stocking rate be? How long is it taking the land to recover after I take some cows off of a certain pasture? That kind of thing. And then again on the right, we just see this is what it's going to look like on the RAP website. And Katie will walk you through this more in detail when she does the tutorial, but you can see this graph here is showing that Katie's peak biomass production is going to be around the end of June. You can see her land is producing almost 140 pounds per acre of biomass every 16 days. So that's going to be her time of peak production.
All right, so using RAP, it can help us answer management questions such as when should livestock enter a pasture? When should animals be moved? Is forage growth ahead or behind of normal or average? And should stocking rates change this year? And so, again, looking at this 16-day biomass graph, you can see when kind of my peak production is, like June said, kind of the end of June. Um, but it also, so looking at this graph, maybe I have always historically put my cows in on May 1st, but looking at this graph, and you can toggle through multiple years. You can go back to, I believe, like 2016 with the 16-day biomass. You're actually able to see historical data and have a better idea of when your peak growth usually is. And maybe like you have historically been entering into your pasture a little bit too early than you actually realize. So using this website, you can actually make better, more informed management decisions. And again, kind of talking about like maybe you are or historically have been entering into a pasture early. And I think it's important to discuss what the term overgrazing is. A lot of people kind of assume that overgrazing is just when you see a field or a pasture that has been grazed all the way down to the ground, and has been like heavily or severely overgrazed. But that's not actually the true definition of overgrazing because I can severely graze a pasture without overgrazing it. And so essentially, the definition of overgrazing is when there's a second bite of an individual grass that is still growing with the energy that it is utilizing from the roots and not from photosynthesizing through its leaves. And so there are three times that this can occur. That's if an animal stays too long in an area and is able to come back and take a second bite of that plant, or if an animal returns too soon to a previously grazed area. So that's when you graze your animals, you remove them from the pasture, but then they come back too soon before that grass or that forage has regrown and is now utilizing energy from photosynthesizing instead of energy from its root. And then there's also a third time that this can happen, that overgrazing can happen, and that's if we come too early in the season when roots are coming out of winter, out of dormancy, or grasses are coming out of winter and out of dormancy and using their roots and the energy from their roots to basically create that spring forage and growth. And so this is really a significant concept to understand because as land managers, there may be times that we have to acknowledge that we don't have other pasture and that we know we have to go enter into a pasture too early. But it's good to understand that because maybe you have a second pasture and maybe you don't enter into the same pasture every single year, constantly hitting those forages at the same time of the year and kind of starting to weaken those plants and maybe even lead them to kind of a die off. So if we know when plants start coming out of dormancy and we know we might have limited resources, we can use this to make good management decisions and maybe flip-flop when we start a pasture on grazing in the spring that can just better help us with the overall health of the entire operation. So some long-term versus short-term data that we can get from using RAP. Long-term has a lot more data that we can gain than short-term, but that doesn't mean it's any more significant. Long-term, we can very easily see and establish the long-term carrying capacity. And this can also change with your management decisions and how your land is reacting to your management decisions. We can determine the vegetation trends. Again, like June pointed out, we can analyze kind of the biomass trends that are occurring. We can also identify years where we have experienced droughts, and we can help that to in our management decisions as far as future droughts or like current year is looking very concerning for a lot of people. And so we can go back into the data and see what the kind of forage production was, what the potential carrying capacity was in drought years, and we can apply that to years such as this year that we suspect we might be seeing a drought year. So that can really shape our management decisions. It can also help us identify problem areas like shrub encroachment, forest encroachment, bare ground encroachment, or decrease. Um, and it can also help us understand the forage seasonality again, like, am I coming back into this pasture too soon? Am I staying too long? And then the short-term data kind of helps us make seasonal grazing decisions, again, with that 16-day biomass. Because we get such short windows of data that we can use relatively quickly, this can really help us guide in making quick seasonal grazing decisions. And it can help us determine utilization rates for our livestock in pastures. And one thing to note is that a lot of times you hear the take half, leave half when you're grazing animals. And I think that idea is starting to migrate into more of a third of a utilization rate because we don't, a lot of times, don't take into consideration that forage gets trampled, it gets lost to wildlife, it gets lost to environmental factors, hail, just different fire maybe. So there's lots of different things to consider on the short-term data side. All right, I'm going to pause here. Does anyone have any questions? I don't know if June can see the chat and see if there were any questions that popped up. No? Okay, we're going to move on then. So I'm going to get into the live demonstration of RAP. I'll be kind of walking you through how to navigate the platform, how to map your pasture or your operation, and then what it's like to view your vegetation data. And June will kind of get at the end how to download your forage data and utilize it in different ways. So I'm gonna have to stop sharing for just a moment to switch over and then I'll pop back in. All right, can you guys see that? Okay. Let me get into this. All right, so you're gonna start out by going launch map, and you'll see that it looks like some pictures that we put into the presentation. And June, I just want to make sure that you're still seeing this, okay? Okay. Um, so right now it's on map. You can toggle it over to satellite. I prefer it on map to find my location, and also I take the cover off, which just brings us down to the roads. And I have noticed that it's not great about finding a specific address, but if you type in the closest town, it's usually pretty good. So my closest town is Ellicott. It's east of Colorado Springs, and then I just kind of generally know where my farm is sometimes. Um, I mean, it's pretty simple. If you can use Google Maps, you can pretty much navigate this. So once I found where my general area is, I like to put it back onto satellite, and there you can see my property again, the 160 acres. And if you look over here on the white box, it says draw features, clear map, upload shapefile. It's probably easiest for most people just to draw your features. So I'm going to click on that. And this is one of those where you click on it and just draw like your corners or your polygon, whatever your property or pasture is like. And sometimes when you reconnect it to the initial point, it like won't take and it clears it and you just have to like try it again. But um, this is about as zoomed in as it can get. Um, and see, I don't know if that's in the way. Um, so then you can toggle the cover back on and it, I personally like the 10 meter and it's very like not transparent at all. And so you can actually adjust this transparency to see things a little better. And sometimes it actually, by adjusting the transparency, you can pick up more land features. Like, I don't know if you guys see all these little lines. But this is my bale grazing, and this map is actually more current than Google Maps. This is November, because I can see my cattle are right here, the little black dots. And December 1st, I remember from my kind of management decisions and um, just tendencies of December 1st, I usually bring them off this 120 acres over to this back 30 acres. And this is essentially a winter sacrifice grounds where I just bale graze and allow my 120 acres to rest and recover. And my cattle usually don't go back out onto the 120 acres until about June. But this year we started bale grazing a little bit earlier because I have probably a considerably larger amount of livestock out there than my land can sustain. This is a pond, and you can see their trail that goes to kind of my corrals that also have a stock water tank in there too. So they like to go back and forth between here. Um, but if you click on well, we'll start with the 30 cover. There's a toggle so you can look at your perennial forbidden grass, your annual forbidden grass, um, shrubs, which I don't have very many shrubs out there at all. Um, trees, I don't have any trees out there really except around the pond. Um, bare ground. I do have some, but it's not terrible. Um, so that's an encouraging thing. You can do the same at the 10 meters, but they do have a little bit more data that you can look at. So you can look at invasive annual grass cover, which I also don't really have any of that, which is a good thing. Um, I'm not entirely sure what PJ cover is. Sagebrush, that might be pinyon juniper, sagebrush, and I have no idea what the gap data sets are. You can play around with that. Maybe you can figure it out. I'm not an expert on this program, but I'm sure it's useful for something or someone. Um, and then biomass, you've got herbaceous, which is basically just the average between the annual and the perennial grasses. So if you wanted to just look at annual, you can. You can see I don't have very many annual grasses out there. Um, I'm much more perennial heavy. And then if you look at them combined, it's more going to be similar to the perennial in my case. It may not be that case in yours, depending on what kind of forage you have out there. And then if you look over here at this graph, I'm going to uncheck biomass. We are on cover 10 meters and perennial forbidden grasses. So you can see that this data goes back to if you basically just hover over any point, it will like populate this little pop-up that tells you the date and what you're hovering on. So I'm at January of 2001, and it's the bare ground yellow line and showing 13.6%. It's pretty interesting because you can look at the precipitation. So 97, there was 21.4 inches in my area. Um, and if I go to the perennial grass and forbs in 97, there was 68.6% cover of grasses. So a lot of times the precipitation is going to follow, I guess like the cover is going to follow the precipitation. And same with bare ground. You can usually see a direct correlation between the two. Um, so this is looking at the 30 meters, which gives you a much longer historical data set. If you toggle over to 10 meters, then it is much shorter, but again, like a lot more different sets of data that you can use. And then here's that annual biomass for the whole year. And then you also have your 16-day biomass. And you'll notice that it's only March 17th. So It is saying that my biomass right now is like 9.2 pounds per acre, and that jives with my local knowledge of my ground. Like, there's not a whole lot growing right now. It's just starting to come out of dormancy. But if you switch the year to 2025, then you can see the entire year's database. Um, and if you find like, let's see. So here's close enough. March of last year, it's actually saying that there was 15.9 pounds per acre out there growing, which tracks because we've had a very dry winter. So you can see how like all of this data incorporated together can really give you a very like intelligent answer to like very specific days and years. I know like 2020 was a dumpster fire for so many reasons. Um, but it looks like my peak forage growth wasn't until, oh, I don't know, August maybe, it looks like, versus um 2025 was a pretty good precipitation year and pretty average, and usually around end of June, mid to end June. So you can start looking at these and playing around and toggling things, and you can start to get kind of a better idea of what um, the data set is telling you, and how to kind of read drought years versus more ample precipitation years. And again, it has like this gap cover. I don't know what that is. I'm sorry. I can try and figure it out and find answers if anyone's curious. Um, but yeah, this just kind of like gives you a good idea of where things are coming from. But the really fun part we're gonna launch over into is I'm gonna go back to Rangelands app. And we're going to go to this thing called Launch Production Explorer. This is a little bit more difficult, not as user-friendly. So I suggest starting with the first map and figuring out learning how that works. But it's still pretty user-friendly and simple to understand. You basically just follow the instructions. Again, you have the opportunity to upload a shapefile. But I'm going to go ahead and just draw a feature because that's easy for me. This does not have, for some reason, the put in the address, so you just have to kind of know where you are geographically and zoom in. And I'm too far out. And I wanted to say, and if you just like get lost, zoom out. I think I could have sworn maybe there's not on this one, but Peyton Highway, Jador. I'm south of that. I'm south of that. Nope. And it's a little touchy, sorry. Okay. So then you can put the satellite on, and there I am. And this has either like a polygon or draw a rectangle, and mine is conveniently a rectangle. And this one is not a click each corner. This is a click once and draw and hold down. And then you go over back to step number 2, set your analysis period. I think given the relative history of kind of the climate variations and changes that perhaps 1986 may not be as relevant to 2026 data right now, as far as learning about your carrying capacity. And so I think that probably no more than 20 years is good for my operation. Maybe like a longer data set is better for you, but I would think 10 to 20 years is pretty good. Oops, sorry, my internet is having fun. And you will notice on the original Rangelands.app map, sometimes it takes quite a bit of time to load because it's quite a bit of data on there. And same thing with this page as well. Like if you kind of lose your internet connection or get kicked off, it can take a moment for it to reload. And if it doesn't, we'll like pop over onto June's page. And I'm like real impatient too, and I always like to keep refreshing, and I don't think that helps it, but it's thinking about it. I don't know. June, do you have yours up or no?
I do, but I would have to zoom in to find your property, which I can do.
Yeah. Let me try just going back. It might not have liked. So launch Production Explorer, draw a feature. Okay, we might just have to settle on mine again.
Let me know if you want me to try my computer too, Katie.
Okay. Jones. Satellite. Zoom in a little. Okay. Um, I need to draw this. Oh, you got to click on the rectangle or the polygon. Then you can draw. All right. And then I'm going to set this to 2026 and hit this black button, clear app. No, not clear. Calculate, sorry, calculate time series once you have your property drawn. And this takes just a minute too, and then it will pop up with this, congratulations, your data has been imported correctly. If you did not import it correctly, you won't get this message. So now what you can do is toggle on these things, tabs up here. So we're gonna first go to our current year production. Um, and right now I'm on 2026. It says production as of February 17th. That must have been kind of the last data set that's been uploaded. 17 pounds per acre, and that kind of tracks. You can see down here that it has your long-term averages. So it gives you a percentage, like 50% of the average, 75%, 125%, and 150. If you scroll down, um, you can see right now, like this, the black thick bold line is kind of where we are right now. And then all of these dotted lines are going to be your long-term averages and the percentage in correlation with that long-term average. So the gray here in the middle is my average, and then it'll of course have like 75 is below 50, 125, and 150. Um, you can also, this is the cumulative production of forage. So starting January 1st to December 31st, like a summary of how much forage had been produced on your property in that year. So not necessarily like a day of when it was produced, but overall how much was produced on your property. And the average for me is like a little bit above 1,000, which I've also tracks with what my knowledge of the on ground is. But you can also add a year. So we can add last year onto this, and you can kind of see um, the variable forage production is now this blue line. Um, and let's see, you could even you could pick 25 to start the year, and then you could add 24. So now 25 is the black line and 24 is the blue line. And you can kind of see how it has changed the past 2 years. Let me see if we can add one more. No. So it looks like you can only do two. So this is just kind of interesting to learn about what your average forage production is. Um, I think probably this bottom one is more helpful just so you can see like overall through the whole year about how many pounds per acres you're producing. Then we can click over at this tab up top to the historical production report. And this looks at your time frame. So I picked 2000 or yeah, 2006. So that's where it's going to start and it goes to 2026, the current year. So this will be really dependent on the scale that you set in the beginning. Again, just kind of looking at and getting an idea of what your trends have been. Um, and this gives you kind of more of a table easy to read so you can see that like 1309 was a really good year. We were at 130% of our average, and then we've also had somewhere there was like a 500. I mean, even 695, that's half of our really good year. So, um, you can kind of see what the land has historically produced and make some estimates on your future carrying capacity based off of these years and just like determining if it was a bad year precipitation wise, a drought year, or if it was a really fruitful rainy year. So this information can help guide that. But now this is really the fun part of this entire website. Um, so like I'm a little OCD, and even though I drew that, like I actually know that my property is 160 acres. Um, the fun part, like I raise Texas Longhorn cattle, and my average weight of an adult animal is not 1,000 pounds. I'm gonna go with um maybe 900, and that's still maybe kind of big. And then let's say I'm just gonna see how long my land can carry my animals without supplementing with hay or anything else. Um, Average intake, percentage of body weight for that animal consumes each day. Again, I have Texas Longhorns. They don't really eat 3%. I'm going to go somewhere in the middle between 2.5 and 3, so 2.7. Um, Expected harvest efficiency, like this is the amount of forage that you are anticipating your animal is going to consume before you remove them. And I'm actually going to crank this all the way up because I know I severely graze with all the animals that I have. And then this adjustment factor for slope and distance to water. I have a real easy, super flat piece of property, but if you click on this little information, you can see that it sets it up percent of slope, 0 to 15, and distance to water. This is in miles. So is it half mile to water, 1 mile, 1.5 miles, or 2 miles? Um, Generally speaking, like mine falls in this 0 to 15% slope, and they're all within half a mile to their water, so I go with 100. This is also optional. I think it just integrates a little bit more data set to be even more specific for your land, but you can also just leave it at 0 and you're still going to get a really good answer. So I have gone through and I have entered all of my data and, adjusted the sliding scale to fit my species of livestock and all of the components that go along with them. So I just hit calculate stocking rate. And this comes up with the average is 1,000 pounds per acre, a stocking rate of 77. Remember, but that's for 30 days. The lowest value, which is currently right now, is 17 pounds per acre, and they're saying I can have one head out there. The highest that I've had within that range of years was 1,365 pounds per acre, and I could have 105 animals for 30 days. Um, and this is just saying kind of the average or the range between the two. But watch what I do when I say like, well, actually, I have travel plans, and so I really need them to stay for a month and a half. And I can toggle that date that they're staying in the pasture, and it readjusts the stocking rate. So 51 is now kind of my average for that pasture. Or maybe I want to keep them there for 2 months. So now I can only have realistically 39 head. So this is really the fun part of you doing your grazing planning, knowing what you've got coming up on your calendar. Are there any kind of difficulties or challenges or inconveniences that you're not going to be able to move them? Or this can also be utilized if you have the e-collars and helping you kind of figure out how you want to create the fences, the invisible fences to move your cattle around the 160 acres that I have here. Um, and this stocking rate time series plot, basically it changes with how many days in the pasture you have set. So it goes back to the historical data and changes it. So when Grandpa says that back in 2006 I used to run 75 pair, you can be like, did you, Grandpa? Or were you like very overgrazing your land with 75 pair, and you can start to maybe like challenge some of these stories, or you can actually utilize it and say like, well, maybe like the climate of my operation actually is changing. Like I've noticed in the last 10 years that we've had some of the rainiest years we've ever had, but also some of the droughtiest years we've ever had. And you can kind of see like at these um, rates and this information that I have inputted in the stocking rate, how it may have changed the data for the historical years. And then it also down here breaks down how the details, how the calculation came to be. So pretty simple. I think all of us are who are in the world of calculating carrying capacity have done it kind of the old school way, and this is the same calculations, but it's just neat that it auto-populates everything and allows you to kind of um, see how it came to get the calculations. And I feel like it does a really good job. The color coding helps you follow where things came from. So I'm not gonna take the time to go through all of that, but and then this is again just kind of a um, your stocking rate time series table that you can look through, and it breaks down um, the pounds per acre versus estimated number of animals that you could have in that, and then estimated number of acres per animal. So if you're needing some kind of specific data or trying to calculate how many acres you need for 40 animals or something like that, you can kind of utilize this table to help you determine that. But yeah, I just think this is really fun being able to toggle and play around with the info that you input, or say like Oh, I actually like sold all my Longhorns and I got Black Angus, and I do know that they consume at least 3% of their body weight. And you can see how it reduced the amount of head. Instead of 39, I can actually only have 35 in there. And this can correlate to if you do beef or lamb and direct market meat, like you can start projecting things for increasing or maybe needing to destock for your meat marketing business. You can potentially play around with some of these um, numbers and figures and project like, oh, like I did really great selling 5 animals at the end of last year, direct to consumer, and I'd really like to expand my operation, but I'm looking at this as I'm currently raising cow-calf pairs and breeding and calving out. Maybe I could be more profitable if I had the same amount of animals on the same property, but not for the same amount of time. Maybe I start buying yearlings or stockers and then I finish them, and I'm actually able to increase my stocking rate and thus increase my meat business because I can carry many more animals, but it's for a shorter amount of time. Maybe it's not year round. Maybe it's not carrying those breeding animals year round. These are a lot of factors that can help educate you on management decisions. Especially for like in regards to what you're doing. Maybe you just sell calves into the general sale, or maybe you are doing some kind of integrated meat business, but this basically allows you to really use a lot of historical data and bring it all together and make a really informed decision about how you're moving forward or how you're going to be proactive about situations like drought instead of reactive about them. Um, so I'm gonna stop real quick and see if there's any questions in relation to this demonstration or anything else. Nothing on the chat. All right. Let me see if I can pop back over to the presentation without having to. Okay. So now I'm going to turn it over to June, who's going to talk to you about how you can further utilize some of this data.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. That was an awesome demonstration. So yeah, in addition to RAP having all these tools built into the platform that allow you to analyze things like vegetation cover and help calculate your stocking rate, all of that, RAP is just a really great source of like raw ecological data. So because it's publicly available, it's open source, it's like high quality ecological data that spans a large geographical area and long periods of time. And so this is something that you can download directly from the platform. You can download it for the whole United States. You can download it for like just one state, say you just want to look at Colorado, or you can download it on the property scale. And you can download this data and then integrate it with other platforms if you want to do like a more in-depth data analysis. And so for some of the other work that I've done at Kivira, I've used the coding language R for this. And so for scientists looking to do like large scale rangeland ecology studies, for example, or like agency folks writing a proposal, or if you're just a rancher who has a coding background or is like a Excel or Google Sheets wizard, you can use this data to just do that like that next step of that really in-depth analysis. So I know coding's not for everyone, but I just wanted to kind of just take a little time and talk about um, yeah, how we can use this because I know we have a variety of folks in this call. So downloadable data, it's great for a lot of things. You can use it to analyze relationships between, wait, can you go back for one sec, Katie? Sorry. You can analyze the relationships between things like precipitation and ground cover. You can like run statistical analyses on those relationships with the data from RAP. It's a great educational tool. You can create graphs and visuals using the data from RAP to, if you're giving a presentation, maybe about changes in ground cover or forage production over time. And yeah, just large scale rangeland ecology studies. Okay, now I'm ready for the next slide. So I'm just going to show you real quick how, if you were to do this, if this is something of interest to you, how you would download the data. So as Katie showed you, you'd be in the first part of RAP, the map, and you can draw your little property, right? And the graph pops up showing you your changes in cover or changes in biomass over time. And you're going to click that little button that's circled in red that says Excel, and that's going to download an Excel file just with all the raw data straight to your computer. And then you can, if you're going to do additional analysis on this, you could then upload that into R or any other coding platform, or like Excel, even if you want to make a graph with that to do further analysis. So I want to show a couple of examples of how I've used R to do this using Katie's property. This is a graph I made in R showing percent ground cover, starting with perennial forbing grass cover on the top. Then in brown right below that, we have bare ground cover. In pink, we have shrub cover. And then on the very bottom in the lighter green, we have annual forbing grass cover. So as you can see, there's a lot of fluctuations from year to year in things like bare ground cover and grass cover. And this graph is really helpful for visualizing how those fluctuations kind of line up, right? So when your perennial forbing grass cover goes down, your bare ground cover spikes, or vice versa, right? Toward the end, more recently, her grass cover has gone up and her bare ground has decreased. So along with these fluctuations, you can kind of see the long-term trends and how this is trending over time with the dotted trend lines. So yeah, the dotted lines just next to the over time lines are going to show you what's happening over time. So as we can see on Katie's property, bare ground has stayed pretty steady at about 20% or so cover. And then perennial forbin grass cover has also stayed pretty consistent. It's just had a small decrease over the past 35 years by about 5%. Um, and this is honestly, this is a lot better than a lot of the ranches and what's happening in the general Western US over the past 35 years. Just with the drought, we've seen, large increases in bare ground cover and decreases in grass cover, as you guys all know. And so, yeah, maybe Katie's geographical area has been a bit luckier, or maybe she's been doing some really fantastic management, I'm sure, with her land that has enabled her to keep a higher grass cover despite the drought conditions we've seen.
It's also important to note that I haven't owned this property since 1990, where the data starts. I've owned it maybe since like 2016 or 17. So we could actually go back and just collect the data set from those years, although it may not give us like as good of a trend overall line. But it would be interesting to kind of look at just under my management for how many years I have owned it, what the trend is compared to historically.
Definitely. And that's something this data or RAP in general is great for too. Like if you are a rancher using more conventional management methods and then you start implementing things like rotational grazing, for example, you can see backed up by the data how your management practices are directly impacting the quality of your forage and your ground cover and things like that. Okay, I just want to show another quick example. So this is also a graph made in R showing annual biomass production in pounds per acre on Katie's ranch. As you can see, it fluctuates a lot from year to year, and this just has to do with the amount of precipitation and that being variable from year to year. In a low precipitation year, her land might produce about 500 pounds per acre of forage, whereas in like a really good year, in say 2016, for example, it looks like her land produced over 1,300 pounds of forage per acre, so almost 3 times what it produced in a drought year. And then you can see the dotted line is also showing over time the general trend. So overall, over the past 35 years, Katie's land has been becoming more productive, which is great news for her. Um, and anyway, I don't expect you guys to all like go home and code all these graphs and stuff, but I just wanted to highlight that this is another application of RAP. from the perspective of a scientist. And despite this, Kavira, we're pretty committed to making sure all of you guys are able to access this kind of in-depth analysis if that's something that's of interest to you. So at the end of the slideshow, there's going to be a QR code, and that'll take you to Kivira's technical assistance page. And from there, you can like directly contact Katie or I. And if there's something that you're really interested in looking at on your land or your allotment, or just, yeah, a piece of land that you're interested in, Katie and I can help you make these graphs and we'll just make them for you. And then we can like interpret them together and talk about how changes in management might benefit your land.
So, a final takeaway from this webinar is really to think about the incorporation between technology and stewardship, and looking at how using and utilizing tools like RAP can help ranchers and land stewards to make data-informed decisions on their day-to-day and long-term um, decisions, and thus like improving their long-term land health and driving their operation to more of a sustainable and a regenerative operation that really considers appropriate stocking rates and carrying capacity. Um, and ideally, we want everyone to be able to demonstrate responsible land stewardship. And we feel that this one form of technology is a really valuable component to being able to utilize the historical data and be able to implement it and to really like drive that home. And I guess the overall theme of tonight is that technology doesn't replace good management, but it can empower better decisions. And I'd really encourage you to jump on here and play around with it and to use the data to challenge your assumptions and to not override your intuition. Are there any like questions that have come up since then? Like, feel free to unmute instead of typing in the chat too.
Hi. Sorry, I don't know if you saw my question. It was just asking if some of these uh the data that you get from this would be applicable to riparian areas. Especially if we're trying to do for example, restoration work in a riparian area, and if you could see the different vegetation changes in that area, even though there might be some sort of canopy cover with trees and leaves and all that.
Yeah, you can definitely do that. I think so. RAP has a button when you're looking at the satellite image that it's usually toggled on automatically, and that kind of it says it excludes water development and croplands. So the actual like stream bed of the stream, like the water, is not going to be shown in the analysis, but like the vegetation on the edge of the riparian area totally can. And yeah, it can see through like canopy cover and all that. And I think that's a really good way that we can use RAP too is like if you do a stream restoration, for example, where you reconnect a river or a creek to its floodplain, and then you're trying to look at how the vegetation is changing over time on its banks, RAP can be really great for that.
Okay,
Does that answer your question?
yeah, that's kind of what I was asking because we're doing a restoration project on a river here in New Mexico, and we're using virtual fencing to keep the cattle out of the riparian area, and we would like to see how that is helping with the recovery after the restoration.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you could even like draw a polygon if you know where your virtual fences are, or if you have
Mhm.
like a file with that, you can kind of
Okay.
upload the area that the cows are like exclosed from onto RAP, and it can show you like the difference between that and the area that's been grazed. I think that's really cool.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. That
It'd
answers
also
the
be really
question.
interesting to hop on there and play around with the dates and see how far back you can go. I know a lot of times, especially near riparian areas, like they have been grazed for a really long historical amount of time.
Hmm.
But it would be interesting to see if you do find any years where it didn't appear that there were cattle grazing the riparian area, and you could maybe see historically if there was more biomass or forage grown. But you will be able to see after you have removed the cattle using the e-collars with that 16-day biomass, you'll be able to get data for this year and see like what the forage production and restoration has been doing for this year.
Okay. Yeah, that pretty much answers my question. Thank you.